What are your thoughts on owned TBR? Like, do you feel the overwhelm? Are you that side, or do you like having unread books to get excited about on your shelves? Let me know. Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm going to do a little TBR Project Zero update. So, since I posted my official start of the TBR Zero update back in the summer, my plans were derailed by 2 events. Number 1 was the massive library book haul, which I have mentioned non-stop on this channel, where I had 19 books come in from the library all at once. And I am still finishing, I think I've still got 1 book left from that. And the second event was that I applied for at the last minute to go to university, and I've become a mature student. So first of all, derailed by the fact that I had so many library books to read and therefore wasn't getting to the books on my own shelves. And then secondly, derailed by the fact that a lot more of my reading now is stuff that I'm reading for university. I do, like, because I've chosen a subject that I'm really interested in, there are some books that I actually already own, which is quite a funny, I think, turn of events, that I am getting some of my owned TBR read through university. But anyway, so in the past 6 months, how many of my own books have I actually read? So I've started 28 different books from my own shelves since then. I DNF'd 3 of those books, and those were The Christmas Murder Game. I really hated the writing in it, so it didn't matter how good the storyline was. I just couldn't get past the writing, really hated the writing, so I don't know if the storyline is any good or not. The second one was Bessie Smith by Jackie Kay. This is a biography of Bessie Smith, written by someone who is a poet, and so it intertwines fiction, poetry and non-fiction, but I just couldn't get into it. Like, I think I'm gonna keep it and try it again another day, but I just couldn't get into it. And then the final one was a translated piece of fiction, which is called I Did Not Kill My Husband. And I just found that, yeah, I think I didn't like the way the character was being built. It was kind of this crazy lady wanting revenge on her husband, and I didn't like the way the woman was being portrayed. Like, even down to the things like she slaps her own baby, like tiny newborn baby. I just didn't like it. So in the end, I put that down, and I think I'm going to get rid of that one. So I finished 11 of those 28 books. I'll talk about those in a minute. And then I have another 14 that I consider in process. Now, I will say, though, that only one of those 14 is one that I'm, like, actively reading each day. The rest of them are, say, non-fiction or short story collections or like books that I am going through slowly. Like, I might pick up here and there, and that's fine. Like, I might dip into them. So I consider them to be in progress, even though I'm not actively reading them at the moment. So the 11 that I finished since I saw you was Atonement. There is a whole reading blog on Atonement. I read And Then There Were None, because on my TBR list, I include books that are actually my parents or my sisters or something, like people who I could easily go to their house and borrow a book from. If I've seen something on their shelf that I really want to read, I include it on my own TBR, and I just have a tag, say, on Storygraph that says whose shelf it's actually on. So, And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie is one I read from my parents' shelves. I really didn't like it. The Sanatorium by Sarah Pearce. Really didn't like that. That was like a 2-star. My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This was an audiobook. Really enjoyed it. Thought it was a very fun read. Not a 5-star, but like very fun listen anyway. The Institute by Stephen King. I'm really enjoying Stephen King on audiobook. Normal People, which I owned on my Kindle, borrowed from the library, read because I borrowed it from the library, and then asked for a copy for Christmas and got one because I loved it so much. Rest and Be Thankful by Emma Glass, one of my favourite books of 2022. Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, another of my favourite books of 2022, but again, another one where I own it on Kindle and I borrowed it from the library, and that prompted me to actually read it. The Testament of Gideon Mack by, I can't remember who it's by. I loved the idea of it, ultimately did not enjoy that. And then Pride and Prejudice, which is one of my 23 books for 2023 and is the first book that I completed in January, so well done me. So I have had to reassess because of the fact that I've gone back to university and because of the fact that I've decided that this year I would like to slow down my reading rather than speed up my reading. I've had to reassess my ideas of how quickly I'm going to get through my project TBR Zero. And that's what I wanted this video to be about, like the thought processes that I've been through in arriving at what I'm about to say. So first of all, I do want to work through my own TBR. So I'm not putting myself on a book buying ban. I'm not banning myself from making library reservations because I currently have a couple of books out. I'm trying out graphic novels at the moment, so I have a couple of graphic novels out, and there's a book club that I like following along with. I struggle to get the books for the club because they tend to pick like small press that my library doesn't necessarily have. But if there is one of those books from the library, I will reserve it. So I've got 3 books from that book club out at the moment, but I'm not going to put myself on a book buying ban because I think that just increases the temptation to go and buy books. And also I have been purchasing some books that I've loved. If I see them in charity shops and things, a book that I've loved on Kindle or from the library or on audio that I don't yet own, I'm gonna buy them for my collection if they, I can afford it. The other thing that has crossed my mind is whether I want to participate in some of the the book prizes that are taking place this year. So last year I really enjoyed getting involved in the Booker Prize. So starting to read the books that were listed on the long list, and then following along as the shortlist got announced, and then the winner, the ultimate winner. I really enjoyed that process, and I was watching Jill from the Book Bully, who said she didn't know whether she wanted to get involved this year, but actually when she thought about it, 2 or 3 of her favourite books of the year were ones that she read because of the Booker Prizes. And when I looked at my own list, I had 3 books: The Trees, Trust, and Case Study, all 5-star reads. I loved them. But then I could just read them in a future year. Like, I have loads of Booker Prize backlist winners and shortlist and long-listed books on my own TBR, so I'm going to work through those instead. I'm still going to get involved in the prizes. Like, I'm going to see if I can guess, based on books I've read, any that might be included. I probably haven't read enough this year releases to know, but anyway, I'm still going to get involved in some of the stuff that's happening. I'm still going to get involved in the conversation. I'm still going to talk about the ones that sound like they're going to be up my street and put them on my future, to read list. But I'm just not, I don't think this year I'm going to end up trying to borrow them from the library or trying to get arcs of anything or anything like that. I'm just going to join in and not read them. Read what I've got. So the next thing to consider is how quickly am I going to work through this list? So I haven't counted. Well, I've tried counting, and then there's inevitably something that I forget that's on the Kindle or on audio or that I've lent to someone, or, there are reasons why I don't necessarily know all of them, but I'm going to put in the rough estimate of 400 books, especially when you take into consideration the fact that I've got books that my parents own that I want to read, things like that, and plenty of the books that are on my shelves now are borrowed books from my family. So it's very hard for me to pin a very specific number on it. Now, last year I read roughly 160 books, which I don't think is maintainable. I don't think that's something I want to achieve every year. I mean, I may end up next year having read that many, especially considering the fact that I'm reading a few graphic novels and I'd like to try some plays this year as well. But ultimately, I'm not striving for this enormous number. Even if I were to read 160 books a year, it would still take me 3 to 4 years to read my own TBR. I know that. But I'm not going to read that quickly because I'm at university and because I've already made the goal of slowing down my reading this year. So it's going to be very much a long-term thing. I have placed my reading goal at 100 on Storygraph because I feel like that's an achievable number. But when I look through, say, some of the challenges that I've joined, like the 23 for 2023, I've joined TBR Spin. I also have my reading goals of reading translated fiction and short stories, and more black authors. I still don't think I'm going to knock off more than, say, 60 to 70 of my owned TBR this year. So it's going to be a slow burn, definitely. Now, I have chatted with Mercedes at Mercy's Bookish Musings because her videos on how small her TBR were really the inspiration behind me doing this in the first place. The fact that she has such a small number on her shelves. And two of her tips were, number one was to get really good at DNFing. Like if you start a book and you're really not into it, just stop and just get really good at DNFing. So over on her Patreon, she talks about all the books that she DNFs, and I was having a quick flick through the different months, and it seems that she DNFs at least 3 books a month. And there was even one month where she was showing like, I think 8 books that she DNF'd that month, which I think on the one hand is a bit sad to me. Like that's really, like if I got to a point where I was at 8 DNF'd books in a month, I'd be really disappointed that I had not finished those 8 stories. Like, not that I feel like I need to finish every story I read, but that I'd started 8 stories and never seen them through, and not seen them through to the conclusion. Oh, this is a really hard one to explain, because I do think if you're not getting on with a book, DNF it. Like, don't waste your time, because the problem is it then puts you off from reading other things because you're still trudging through this book. But there's part of me that hopes that I'm never going to be in a position where there are 8 books in 1 month that I feel that way about. Like, that's what I mean, is that that to me is just like, oh God. The other thing that I really struggle with is, there is one book in particular, which is The Glass Pearls by Emeric Pressburger, which I read in the summer. And as I was reading it, I was thinking this is probably going to be like a 3.5, 3.75 star out of 5 for me. Like, it felt like a good story, but it didn't feel like a wow. And I think there was a temptation to DNF it because it was a slow build book. It was slow paced. But by the time I got to the end, like, it was a big contender for one of my favourite books of last year, because that book stayed with me. Like, its slow burn message and the way it built, it was all about the paranoia building in this gentleman. And the way that played out ended up sticking with me. And like, I still think about it. I want to own that book. I even bought a copy of that book as a Christmas present. It was one of the few books that I actually bought for someone as a gift because it really reminded me of a specific family member. Like, I was actually quite close to DNFing that at the time and thinking, no, I don't really want to continue with this. So I'm glad I pushed through that. So that's a really hard balance to strike for me. The other thing I will say is that as we came into winter, as we neared Christmas, I started getting a lot more ballsy with my DNFs. Like, I started getting to a point where I was like, no, can't bother with this one, no, can't bother with this one. Or like, I'd have like a couple of, say, audiobooks on the go where I'd gone, oh, I'm just gonna put this to one side, and then I was like, no, just DNF it, I don't want to read it. And definitely with the library books, if I was starting a library book and then really not enjoying it, I was like, well, it's gotta go back to the library, DNF it. So yeah, as we got into winter, I really started getting a lot more DNF heavy. I wonder whether that's going to continue or whether that's a winter thing. I don't know. I feel like I've DNF'd a lot of books this month. The other piece of advice Mercedes gave me was culling your TBR. And that's basically how anyone that she's spoken to who's really managed to whittle down their TBR has achieved it. It's going through your books and saying, am I still interested in this, or does it keep falling to the bottom of my TBR? Like, does everything else just seem way more interesting than this? And that's really hard for me, because the books, I mean, I did do a try chapter test where I was like, actually these books no longer really interest me, but for the most part, all the books on my TBR I am interested in. There are a couple that have ended up here because there are a couple of things that I am interested in doing. One of them is reading prize winners and prize nominated books, and the other one is I researched what is currently being studied for English literature exams in the UK for GCSE and A-level, and I collected a few of the books on there to read. And there are a few on that I'm not particularly interested in. Yeah, so we've got Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. This one I think I worry about because it's a white man telling the story of Japanese culture, Japanese culture. But I did read, before I bought it, I did read the introduction or the author's note, and he did actually go and consult with an actual geisha. So he's telling someone else's story who may not have otherwise told it. So I don't know how I feel about that. I've got Anita and Me by Mira Sial. This one says winner of the 1996 Betty Trask Award, but I think this one was on the English literature syllabus. Books with children as protagonists don't often interest me. And then Paddy Clark, Ha Ha Ha. But I feel like this is the sort of thing where I'd actually end up really enjoying it, because a lot of the books that are like this I've ended up enjoying. Yeah, anyway, so those are 3 that, you know, are on my list that I'm now a bit like, oh, I'm not 100%. But still, I think I'm going to find it hard to whittle anything down, because generally if it's on my TBR, it's because I've been interested in the premise. So what does that mean for my goal? How am I going to achieve this? And I think what all of this has done is made me reconsider what my ultimate goal is. Is it TBR Zero, or is it something else? And you've probably seen, if you're on any form of social media, a quote from Umberto Eco is being shared a lot, where he's basically suggested that he has an enormous library not because he's read all the books, but because he likes to be surrounded by books that he hasn't read. And it's like a marker of intelligence, like wanting to know more. Like, I think that this quote and this aesthetic thing is being shared because people want an excuse to go and buy books. Like, it's a consumerist excuse, but it does feed into what I'm saying here, and that is, why do I want a smaller TBR? Like, why was I going for TBR Zero? And as many other people who are doing these sorts of goals will tell you, it can be overwhelming having that many books to, like, unread, and then choosing your next book, and books that continually don't get read, and, you know, like, it is overwhelming, and I feel that guilt of having all these unread books. But on the other hand, I like shopping my shelves. Sometimes I come and sit in here and I'll just read like blurbs of books and get re-excited about books that I'd forgotten what they're about. So I don't necessarily hate having a TBR, an owned TBR. I like that. So I don't think my goal is 0, but I would definitely like to get within double digits. Like, to get within double digits, that's my goal. But that doesn't sound great on the title, like Project TBR Double Digit. So I'm going to keep calling it my Project TBR Zero. I'll keep updating you as we go. But yeah, my goalposts have changed ever so slightly, in that I no longer think I want no TBR. I like having books to get excited about. I like, yeah, shopping my shelves. So there we go. That is my Project TBR Zero update.